Welcome, everybody. I'm J. Hart Ellis, and today I wanted to go through my top Tales of Tribute tips for the Elder Scrolls Online, thinking through what has helped to consistently keep me at or near the top of the leaderboard month by month. And I've organized these based off of early game and then going into late game considerations. So I've jotted down some notes and I'll just go through these. So my first tip, starting out a match, is to pick patrons that you are comfortable with. So a lot of this comes down to whether you're going first or going second or reacting to what your opponent has picked, and especially thinking about which of the 4 to 6 cost cards each patron has to offer that are really critical during the first couple of turns. And so each match is going to be flavored differently based off of the patron selection. And so if I'm going first, I tend to like to go with Hallelujah. I really like the econ-centric matches and has some really good cards that I know I'll be able to pick up if they're on the tavern first turn, like Custom Seizure or Luxury Exports. And then I really like to pair that going first with Crows. Again, some really good 4-cost cards. And then the 6-cost cards that my opponent might be able to get because they're going second are a little clunkier and don't really help until the late game. And if I'm going second, I'm feeling like I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage, and so I tend to go with Red Eagle and Rajan. I think they just kind of help to level the playing field, and maybe if my opponent's picked one of those, I'll go with Colorus. And based off of what my opponent picked, if I'm going first, I might pick Alessia instead, just kind of to snowball and get lots of agents out. And other matches are going to feel different, like Almalexia is just slower, and I tend to like to go with more matches under my belt, so I won't tend to pick Almalexia. Or Mora is a lot more unpredictable and RNG centric, and so I won't tend to pick that either. I'm just not as comfortable with it. I have my favorites, so I'll pick those instead. However, it's good to know how to play every single one of these patrons because your opponent might pick them, and so I can play any of the patrons pretty well, but I'll pick my favorites. And then my next tip is to make your deck better. So, especially early on, you only start with the 6 gold cards as well as one of each of the starting suited cards, and these are really weak. And most of the good cards in the game do cost at least 6, and so you can't even afford any of those first for a while. And so the easiest way to make your deck stronger early on is to use the treasury patron ability to upgrade, say, gold, or especially the red or the red eagle card. Upgrade those away into Writ of Coin so that you can at least try to get to a point where you're getting 6 coin per turn so that you can afford some of the better cards. And then if you can afford stronger cards, then you can continue to snowball that so you can be buying cards and buying contract protecting cards and maybe even continuing to do treasury upgrades every single turn that could just really snowball toward victory. However, not every match has to be an econ match, and if the opportunity presents itself to maybe get like double Midnight Raid or just to pick up a lot of the strong red cards, you can just kind of go for like raw power and try to win that way. You don't always have to play an econ game. And with that, my next tip is to aim for combos. Maybe that's just going for one suit. Maybe it's trying to get like a quadruple crow combo so that you can just cycle through your entire deck every single turn. It can be really satisfying and also very powerful. A good way to win. So lots of times it's a matter of just trying to collect all of one color, or maybe it's just trying to set it up by like tossing away cards so that you then reliably set up combos. So trying to get cards that will have strong amounts of coin and power per turn or extra effects just because you've comboed them. And my general assumption on this is to assume that my combos are not going to hit and assume that my opponents will. So if I'm going first and there's an opportunity for like Custom Seizure versus Hostile Takeover, I almost always pick the Custom Seizure just because I'll assume that the Hostile Takeover will not reliably combo for me, even though it's really strong when it does. Could potentially get some really great cards with that, but Custom Seizure can get some really great cards and it's reliably going to do that, so I'll tend to favor Custom Seizure. And then my next tip would be to be mindful of play order. So this is especially true if you're going to cause your deck to cycle, and that could happen just simply through a harvest season or through using like a toss ability card might cause your deck to cycle. So the best thing to do before you cycle your deck is to get some good cards into your deck so that you can then draw them very quickly within the next turn or two. And so buy cards from a tavern that are strong early, or maybe it's just a matter of how you are like maybe making some good cards available for yourself early on in the turn by like using barter early on, or maybe it's a matter of just like what order are you using certain cards, like just thinking about all the possibilities of every action that you can do and what's the right way to organize them. So maybe you have both Time Mastery and Dreaming Cave in your hand. Well, the best thing to do would be to play Time Mastery first so that you can get rid of all the weakest cards coming up in your deck, and then you pretty reliably know what card you're going to draw with the Dreaming Cave, and hopefully it can help you get a good combo or deal with the present situation. And so what you really want to try to do is to set up your next turn to be strong. And then other things to consider might be like maybe there's a mine out on the tavern. Well, it'd be better to get that early on in the turn so that you know that you can afford it, because net it's only costing you 1 coin if it's not comboing, and that could reveal another good card underneath it, or maybe even another mine, which would be great. However, if you do other actions or buy other stuff and then you don't have the 3 coin left, you might leave that out there for your opponent inadvertently, and that wouldn't be good. So you want to be careful about all the order of the actions that you are taking. And with that, you want to play strategically and avoid pitfalls. So again, think about every single action you can take and what's going to be best, especially within a strategic mindset. So thinking especially about how are you actually going to win, how are you going to get to 40 points. Maybe it's a matter of tavern manipulation. You want to try to make good options available for yourself, and you want to deny your opponent cards that would be beneficial to them. It's also just going to be a matter of using contract actions effectively, like maybe thinking about how you get Black Sacrament out so that you can deal with an agent that your opponent has put up, or just like using Tithe. One of my favorite combos is Tithe, and then just doing 2 treasury upgrades in one turn can be really good. You need like 7 coin to do that, so that's really a fantastic way to try to snowball with the gold as well. But then you also want to try to avoid pitfalls. Maybe your opponent could throw up something that you just can't counter. Maybe they get a couple agents out, and then they slap a shield bearer to defend them, and then you have no way to kill this. Like, you want to try to avoid finding yourself into that position, so you want to try to like keep anti-agent cards out there, or maybe you're just trying to get rid of shield bearer from the tavern yourself somehow else, or maybe you're just buying it yourself. So there could be other, like a trap that I've come across, had struggle with. It has been like Shihai summoning. Like if you get this, and it's really great for getting cards that cost 5 or less, but what you could do is just make it so that the entire of the tavern costs 6 or more, and then this is just like dead weight. So if your opponent has this, you want to try to set them up so that they can fall into that trap, or you might want to try to avoid that trap by just making more options available for yourself that cost 5 or less. So that can be a pitfall to try to avoid. And then also, just as far as playing strategically, I think lots of times you're thinking about snowballing and making your deck stronger, and you can lose sight of actually trying to win. And so a good thing to do is like actually strategically thinking about when do you start sacrificing cards away with a Hallelujah Patron interaction, so that you can actually bank a lot of prestige and actually progress toward victory. My next tip is to be flexible. So matches are going to be wildly unpredictable. There's lots of things that will happen, and so you can kind of develop strategies along the way, but don't overcommit to them. So maybe you're collecting crows and you just want to buy nothing but crows, but maybe they just don't come, or maybe it will be better to kind of do a mix of different suits so that you can just more reliably get the combos. So or maybe even like a opportunity for patron victory will present itself. Like one thing that can happen is like you get currency exchange and you're like, oh, extra patron interaction per turn. Maybe I'll try to win by patron victory. Well, if you just put everything into trying to win by patron victory, you might lose sight of the fact that you could have just won by getting to 40. So, like, you can have a strategy, you can try to have a path toward victory, but don't overcommit to it if an easier path toward victory presents itself. Or maybe what might happen as far as being flexible is maybe you kind of have to shift. Like maybe your opponent's been collecting red cards and Legion's Arrival pops out on the tavern, and that'll just really help them so much. So you buy it defensively, and so that's maybe going to throw your strategy kind of into turmoil. But maybe then you start collecting red cards yourself so that you can combo off of those. And then also, especially with Mora, your opponent might throw some really weird cards at you, or you might throw good weird cards at your opponent. And so you have to be flexible with what do you do with these cards. Maybe you start collecting that suit yourself. That's one of the reasons I really like Hallelujah, by the way, because you can like get rid of cards that you're buying defensively or that your opponent maybe throws at you. So being flexible. And then my next tip is to pay attention to your opponent. So you can generally tell what your opponent will be able to kind of do the next turn. You can always go click on their deck up in the corner and see what's in store for you. You won't know exactly what 5 cards they have in their hand, though. But what you want to do is be mindful of what they are likely to do and what they can't do. So lots of times that might be a matter of leaving kind of good cards on the tavern because you know they can't actually afford them. Like you can look and see like, oh, you can do a coin count and be like, oh, they only have 5 gold that they can play next turn, so they won't be able to afford anything that costs 6 or more. So I'm kind of safe leaving those out for a turn. And then what you often want to do is try to make the tavern expensive for your opponent so that they can't really afford very much, or they have to be the ones to be buying either random cheap cards or contract action cards that might then diminish what they can actually afford that turn, and then might actually open up good cards for you to purchase the next turn. And then what you often want to do is to deny combos that your opponent might be able to trigger. So lots of times you're just kind of building up your own deck, and you can just kind of pay attention to your own deck and what you can do, and just completely not be paying attention at all to what your opponent's doing. But then your opponent might just be able to really get some good combos. So like if they have picked up a Midnight Raid, then oftentimes they'll be able to get good strong combos for extra power just by buying contract action cards from the tavern. So if your opponent has 1 or 2 of these, then you want to try to minimize the amount of the Red Eagle contract action cards that are left on the tavern. Maybe you're buying them yourself or otherwise removing them. And then maybe one example is thinking of your opponent is maybe I have 8 coin this turn that I can spend, and both the Rally and the Armory are out on the tavern, and well, Rally is stronger. I'd rather just go for that, but maybe it'd be better for me to buy the Armory and like do a coin upgrade, because maybe my opponent can't actually afford the Rally, but they could then buy the Armory. So if I buy the Armory, I can just deny them that, and then maybe I can get the Rally down the road. So I was thinking about what your opponent actually can do, or is likely to do, based off of what you leave on the tavern. Another thing can be, if you're paying attention to your opponent, you might be able to like buy a contract agent that your opponent can't deal with, such as maybe Forest Wraith. It has 3 health. That's kind of a lot to deal with early on. Or maybe even late on, maybe your opponent has no good means of removing this, and you can just kind of safely get that out there, and they'll just have to deal with it for several turns. Or maybe that will actually end the game right there. And so my next tip is to use patrons carefully. Just kind of keeping in mind that you can only use 1 per turn. Oftentimes, I'll just kind of get into the habit of like using Red Eagle a lot because I'll be able to get some good combos, or it's just always going to like draw a card that I can maybe afford more card from a tavern. However, like especially later game, maybe I just want to be banking that power, and I should not be spending that 2 power unless if I really think it's going to work out on net to be better. So definitely calculate whether or not it's going to be worth it to use the patron interactions, and maybe being slightly biased toward using a patron interaction if it will progress toward opening up a path to winning by flipping all four agents to favor you. But I would never like go for that as a strategy. It doesn't tend to line up that way. Usually, having all four agents favor you will just kind of naturally happen when your deck is stronger anyway, and so kind of don't put all your eggs in that basket. And then also kind of keeping in mind, like, you might be able to sacrifice like one card per turn with Hallelujah. That might be a good way to try to whittle down your deck and to keep your combos strong, or just to get a lot of prestige banked. And then keeping in mind, like, if you have Crow, you only have one good Crow flip, so maybe you get like 15 or more coin in one turn, and you just use it as an opportunity either to get over the line of 40 or to just kind of get close, or maybe use this one time just kind of defensively to deal with a wall of agents that your opponent has put up, and then keeping in mind that, like, once this favors you, you can't do anything with it unless if your opponent flips it back. And then next tip is to, especially late game, don't make your deck worse. So you kind of build up your deck, you're buying more and more cards from the tavern, and you might just get into a habit of buying cards because you can and because you kind of know that they are good cards. But I feel like a lot of cards are maybe good early game, but then kind of lose oomph as you continue through the match. So, like, Grand Larceny, fantastic if you can get this the first couple of rounds. But later on, it's not actually necessarily helping you to get to 40. And so just kind of buying cards for the sake of it can really make your deck worse, especially some of the like 2-cost cards like Sleight of Hand. Like, oftentimes people are kind of like building up their coin per turn, their power per turn, getting agents, and then they just kind of start randomly buying things like this, and I'm like, what are they doing? They're making their deck worse. So you can actually like take an average of like how much the average coin and power of your deck is and calculate whether or not it will actually be better for you. Or maybe it's just too risky to even buy card from the tavern because that might just open up something better underneath that your opponent might be able to buy. So generally speaking, you'd rather keep the tavern kind of weird and full of cheap things that are actually going to make your opponent's deck worse, so that they're kind of like forced to buy them, and then that might open up opportunities for you to get better cards that are kind of hiding underneath. And then, especially late game, instead of buying cards that are adding to your deck and making it potentially even worse, I can just hunt for contract action cards. That could be especially any that give power, or ones that help to whittle down your deck, or help you to draw to get more combos, or give more interactions. You're just oftentimes, especially late game, you are looking for contract action cards. They're not going to be adding to your deck and diluting your combos. They will be just directly beneficial. So the one exception on this, like where you might make your deck worse, is very late game. You kind of know what the next couple of hands are going to look like, and you might know that even if you buy something cheap, the game's going to be over before you draw it. So you can buy something cheap that costs like 2 coins, so that you can just try to reveal a good contract action card, like maybe you're just trying to get to 40 by buying things like imprisonment and blackmail. So you can buy cheap things to try to reveal other things that are more directly beneficial. And then another thing I often see is, like with Alessia, is a late game, you don't really want to be spamming Alessia. You're getting some good cards out of that, but Chainbreaker's Sergeant that's being generated from that is not the strongest card in the game. And so if you're just spamming that, it'd be better to be using your patron interaction to otherwise try to win. And that's my last tip, is to try to win. There's lots of different paths towards victory, and you've been thinking strategically along the way. And so if you feel like your deck is in a position where you can start a sprint to 40 and win it, well, then you start that race. So maybe that's a matter of starting to sacrifice, like, your really expensive Hallelujah cards, or maybe it's getting that one good crow flip. So you're just trying to bank prestige, get a lot of power, and you are trying to get to 40. And then another to go along with that is don't give up. Sometimes funky combos can really line up. Like maybe you get tons of these contract action cards with Mora. They like pay for themselves. They can get like lots of power, all in one big burst. Or maybe you get like 3 mines in one turn, and you get tons and tons of coin that you can spend, and that can really flip things around. So don't give up. Some funky combos might just really turn things around. Or maybe it will be that you suddenly find yourself in a position where you can come from behind it from winning via Patron. So that can work too. And then oftentimes the game is over once somebody gets to 40. You can try to get to that sprint to that finish line, but like Rajan might like drag you back from the finish line by getting you back under 40, especially with the shadows. If you get knocked under 40, you might not necessarily win that turn, or you might be able to claw it back entirely. But usually whoever gets to 40 will win. But then if it becomes a matter of leapfrog, because your opponent then has a turn to catch up, and then you are kind of leapfrogging to 40, 45, 50, and so on and so forth. One thing is that you want to try to position yourself that you either end up to a point where they can't catch up to you, or if it's a race suddenly to 80, because whoever gets to 80 first just wins automatically, then you want to try to get to a position where you get to 80 first. So oftentimes what that can be is you don't just want to get the most power at the end of your turn. You might actually like withhold some of these Mora cards that might be beneficial to your opponent. So because then you can set it up so that you can be the one that gets to 80. You don't want to allow your opponent to inadvertently be the one that gets to 80 first. So lots of different ways to play. So many different fun matches I've played. I played thousands of games and have done so well with it over the years, and continue to have a lot of fun with it. And I'll continue to be making tribute content going so forward. So this was just a quick overview, but be sure to subscribe for future content and have a lot of fun with Tale of Tribute, and maybe I'll match up with ya. So have fun. Stay spicy. Moo.